I'm going to begin with two stories. There's a man, Mark. Mark is invited into a university foundation. Is everyone familiar with university foundations? That's who you write your checks to. He says, University Foundation, what's your mission? And the University Foundation says, our mission is to make our university great. And Mark says, fantastic. How much money do you have in your endowment? And they say, let's say $1 billion. And he says, what was your financial return on your fixed income last year? And they get sad, and then they say, well, less than 1%. And then Mark says, did you know that your university, the very organization who your mission is to help make better, has $500 million of deferred maintenance? And that University Foundation could lend university money, let's say at 3% right now, and you would more than double your financial return. You would reduce energy costs, water costs, impact on the environment, increase amenities, create a healthier, safer, happier place for your staff, faculty, and employees and students to work. And they look at him and they say, how do we do this? And he has the $1 Billion Greens Challenge. He has worked with over 60 universities to set up 130 revolving loan funds with universities to fund their own infrastructure. And guess what? The financial return isn't 3%. The median return is 18%. And you know what the great part about this model is this model doesn't just work for university foundations, it works for municipalities. It works for hospitals. It works for any entity that has a balance sheet. So a woman walks into a foundation, and that woman's me, Steph. And I walk into a $1 billion foundation, and they say, Steph, we want to discuss impact investing with you. And I say, fantastic. Just to get clear, as I know you've all heard about the definitional issues, I say, are we actually discussing your endowment, your philanthropic portfolio, or your direct investments? And I said, because we just worked with a $100 million foundation to help them identify that they were spending an extra $600,000 over 5 years with their investment advisor to lose $5 million. So we help individuals and institutions with $10 million to $5 billion look at ways to reduce fees, increase impact, make better decisions, employ better governance, and actually get more in touch with their endowment capital. And then we say, or are you talking about your philanthropic portfolio? Because we actually believe about 10 to 30% of our donations are going to amazing nonprofits, such as ourselves, that are actually turning around and paying high-interest mortgages, loans, lines of credit? Or are we discussing direct investments? And in the case of private foundations, that's program-related investments, of which academically I do a lot of work in. And in this example, they say, Steph, let's talk about program-related investments today, direct investing. I say, okay. And I said, well, what was your financial return on your endowment? And this last year, on, let's say, one little north of $1 billion endowment, they said 2%. And I said, okay, how much money did you give away? And they said last year about around $30 million. And let me ask, this is the participatory part of the presentation, so I get to ask you the question, you can pretend you're the foundation. I asked them, what is the financial return of a grant, the $35 million you give away to the foundation? Anyone know the answer? 0. And I say, well, you're in fantastic company. We've actually given this presentation to thousands of people a year, and only 6 people have gotten the answer correct. And I say, wouldn't it be 0%, say last year the Ford Foundation gave a $15,000 grant to the Impact Finance Center. Wouldn't it be a 0% return if a year later we, the Impact Finance Center, returned that $15,000 to the Ford Foundation? And then they say, negative? And I say, absolutely. And negative 100% financial return. And I'm not sure when this happened, but this is the great part about this simple math, is it doesn't matter if you're a foundation, a high net worth individual, a family office, a corporate strategic, or a low income or middle income individual. At some point along the way, we bifurcated our capital into 2 categories, all of us. We have this bucket of money that we give away called philanthropy donations, of which we're attempting high positive impact. We know what that is, but we've forgotten that it's actually an investment with a negative 100% financial return. And then on the other hand, our biggest lever for social change is actually our investment portfolio, of which, by the way, you can get a negative 100% return to market rate on that, and that has impact both positive and negative. So at that point in the conversation, this is like, we kind of walk in as an academic, and then we transition to deals. I've completed over 100 deals now in impact investing. And they say, well, how would this work for us? And I say, okay, well, what do you give money to? And they give money in 4 key areas: scholarships, school facilities, economic development, and hospices. And I say, okay, so what you're telling me is you're giving a student, let's say at University of Denver, an $8,000 scholarship at negative 100% investment, financial return, but that same student has a $40,000 student loan at 8% interest. Have you considered giving that student a $48,000 1% student loan instead? Because they would save more than the $8,000 you're giving them, and you would increase your financial return from negative 100 to 1. Can anyone tell me what that financial return is? 101% financial return on a fixed income. That, by the way, for a private foundation counts against their 5% distribution requirement. And you would go from 101% return, you would grow your endowment, you would recycle your principal for another student. And then they say school facilities, and they give $1 million to 5 schools every year. And I said, do you know a typical mortgage on a school facility is $5 million mortgage at 6 to 12% interest? Have you considered, instead of giving them $1 million at negative 100, give them $5 million at 1? They'll increase their financial return 101% and save millions in interest. And then we say economic development. And I said, did you know that private foundations have had a tax incentive since 1969 to not only give grants, but debt and equity investments to for-profits if they further the charitable purpose of the mission? And they said, nobody told us this. And this is where it gets really fun for small economic community development. The hospices. Let's say the hospice has a line of credit at 12%. And I said, you know, a negative 10% investment for the foundation is a 90% financial increase to you giving your money away, and would save the hospice 22% in interest. Everyone following that basic math? So can you do this? Does it work? Yes. In Colorado, we've been working at this with our center for several years, and I'm going to just walk through 3 specific examples: a nonprofit, a museum, and a startup. And I like to do this because you can look at debt, refinancing, you can take an asset, make it more efficient, and you can actually use it for for-profit companies to increase impact. So in the first one, it's the Museum of Contemporary Art. It's a basic refinance. It's a little more complicated than that. But by bringing lower cost capital to refinance their mortgage, we saved them $565,000 a year. That's as if we were giving them an unrestricted grant. And for the private foundation, it's 101% financial return. In the case of and we conceptualized that strategy, and the board took it and ran with it. In the case of this nonprofit building, same kind of project. They were doing a building renovation. They were short $6 million. We worked with the donor to actually work with their local community foundation, and we did essentially a $9.5 million 0 and 1% loan to the nonprofit, saved them $6 million in interest, and allowed them to do a historic tax credit. $6 million in interest, and the philanthropists will get back their money. And most recently, there's an amazing Silver Nest. It's a startup company that's working in the aging population to match housemates with the aging population for the purpose of additional income, help around the house, and companionship. Turns out a typical boomer has only saved $50,000 for retirement, but half of them own their house. For the first time, we had philanthropists that had never done a direct investment actually work with angel investors to take money they were going to give away and actually invest in this for-profit startup. So when you walk away from the talk today and you're like, what did she say with that negative 100%? Go back to a basic refinance. You take a building, a mortgage, $5 million loan at 7%, you refinance it at 3%, you save $2.3 million. That's as if you're giving that organization an unrestricted grant. And how does this affect the philanthropist, the investor? we actually modeled a $500 million foundation. And there are some concerns about if you start doing program-related investments and direct investing with grant money, are you actually going to take money away from the nonprofits that need it the most? And we said, well, what happens if you actually model this over 20 years? And so this particular 20-year, $500 million foundation, over 20 years, they gave away $423 million. They still had $594 remaining in their endowment. And we said, well, what would happen instead of giving away 5% in grants and operating expenses, what if you gave away 4%? And what if you took 1% of that and you got a 3% return, or a 103% increase? Well, what happens is as that 3% money is paid back to the foundation, it actually grows the endowment. So instead of having $494 million in our endowment, we now have $529 million in our endowment. And at first glance, it looks like we've given away less grant money, $423 million instead of $359. But you have to remember, we have this outstanding portfolio of 3% loans to the very organizations we were supporting philanthropically. And legally, if you forgive those loans or they default at year 20, which we'll do for financial modeling purposes, they actually become a grant. Which means we will actually give away $504 million instead of $423 million. So strategic financing and restructuring from a sources and uses perspective can not only save nonprofits money, help out for-profits, but it actually can grow the philanthropic pie. So part of the reason Amy asked me to be here today was in Colorado. We've been doing a lot of education nationally, but specifically in Colorado with probably about 20 different organizations. And it turned out we have about $1 billion looking to invest locally. $1 billion wanting to invest in Colorado, but they were pretty convinced that there were not investment opportunities. So to Michael's point in 2 presentations ago, how do you create the list of investment opportunities in Idaho? And we said, how do we do that? So we ended up pulling together a group of community members and creating a 3-year effort to bring $100 million of investment capital to Colorado. It's called Co-Impact Initiative. So we do about 50 to 100 of these types of events throughout Colorado every year. We now have a class for philanthropists and investors, a class for nonprofits and social enterprises, a class for for-profits. It takes a lot of priming the pump to actually build that list. So we did about 50 events, and it culminated this year in Co-Impact Days. We've actually even branded it, so you can imagine Idaho Impact Days. It's a March 2nd through 4th this year, and what we did is we sourced over 350 investment opportunities in Colorado. Those were projects, nonprofits, for-profits, and funds, looking for debt, equity, royalty, all different types of capital. And then we brought everybody together, over 700 people, for a 2.5-day executive education course. We had 1-day legal tax and accounting workshop, 1-day due diligence workshop to learn how to evaluate a direct deal. We had a nonprofit and we had a for-profit. And then we had a symposium where we actually explained how to manage your capital better and do direct investing across your entire portfolio. And then we invited 60 of those social ventures. We call them social ventures for a farmer's market and basically created a farmer's market where people got to go shopping throughout the farmer's market. So some quick early results from that. Over 15 investments have already been made, many of which have been made not just by people, philanthropists, private family foundations, people that had never done direct investing before. We have about 309 interests in making those investments, and we're really going into year 2 and doing the education efforts that it's going to take to find more deals and also find more impact investors. Essentially, you can think of us as if you have accelerators and incubators for the social ventures, we're the accelerator incubator for the money. We help them figure out if you want to be an impact investor and what's your geographic scope, your risk, liquidity, and impact focus. So with that, if any, before I close and say thanks, I just want to say if anybody wants to partner with us, Amy, we'd love to help support and ally efforts in Idaho to get these efforts going. We're always looking for education partners to host our workshops. Love to do some in Boise, Sun Valley, see if there's any interest for the for-profits, nonprofits, or the impact investors, which are philanthropists and investors. So we're always looking for education partners. we're looking for those future impact investors. We have to find them and we have to grow them. Whether you care about food, resiliency, whatever your passion and interest is, we need to find those people and institutions with $10 million to $5 billion and get them through this training and help them save money and increase their impact. And then finally, we need to find those very rare special people who want to philanthropically support folks like Amy and Allie at the Institute for Sun Valley Resilience and impact investing infrastructure. So there are those of us that work with national funders and local funders who philanthropically care about supporting the space. As I was getting ready for this presentation today, I had a wave of emotions go on me, and I took this picture from Patty Lucine's bathroom. Oh, the places you will go. And why I had this wave of emotions is the last time I spoke in this valley was for high school graduation when I was a salutatorian 24 years ago. And so not only do I want to thank the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience, Allie, Amy, and especially all the people behind the scenes making this happen. It's a heavy lift to do this type of work. But I also want to thank our community and especially the great teachers I had all through junior high, high school that inspired us to do what we're doing today. So thank you very much.